Why can't they wait till 18?
Because testosterone is a one-way street.
I could do a full podcast of just talking shit about Brianna Wu.
You really think they're straight? And then I just got blocked.
He said if you want more Hunter Schafers, you should be okay with puberty blockers. He responded to this interview with Shapeshifter, the detransitioner. There are some feminine boys who can't possibly fit into society the way they are. My life is fine as a feminine man, so clearly that is not true. Not only that they have to transition to make it in society, but they have to do it early, otherwise they won't be fuckable enough, basically.
I don't think Brianna is HSTS. I think Brianna is AGP. No. It's always the AGPs that I see having this fantasy of the trans child.
You 100% nailed it. Brianna has openly tweeted that he was bisexual, the autistic anime nerd. And I'm like, that's you. You're describing yourself.
It kind of brings me on to this concept of true trans, which I'd be interested to talk to you about. And I have a feeling that you and I might be quite aligned on this topic. But I saw you commented on the debate between Blair White and Brianna Wu on Brad Palumbo's channel.
Don't get me started on Brianna Wu.
Yeah, well, you can talk about Brianna because, listen, I would try and be kind of respectful with Brianna because I can kind of see Brianna is I mean, maybe even if it's in a disingenuous way, trying to kind of make some change. And Brianna just blocked me out of nothing. And actually, it's relevant to the point because I noticed Brianna unfollowed me, which I was thinking that's weird because we used to have exchanges back and forth that were kind of friendly. And then Brianna put out this ridiculous tweet saying, you know, trans women age so much better. You know, this is why straight men are so into trans women. And I thought it was such a misogynistic point. Plus also the photo of whoever he posted, you know, had filters and also had like facial feminization surgery and all that stuff, which many women don't obviously get. But I basically said, do you really think they're straight? Like just wanting to open up a conversation. And then I just got blocked. So anyway, I'll share more about my thoughts on Brianna maybe after we watch this clip. But were you going to say something?
I could do a full podcast of just talking shit about Brianna Wu.
Maybe you'll have to come back on.
I have a lot of issues with what Brianna tweets and it being seen as moderate or reasonable.
Yeah.
Because it is very much not, but we can play the clip first and then...
Yeah, then let's get into it.
Why can't they wait till 18?
Because testosterone is a one-way street. You know, like it will screw your body up in a way that will make it much more difficult for you to integrate into society. You know, it's just testosterone is so powerful. Let me give you a really specific example. I've had 3 separate surgeries on my jaw to make it like small enough that I look decent. I have partial paralysis on one side of my face. These surgeries are not innocuous. So I just think that, you know, I think that if we can identify those few kids, I think you're going to be saving them a lot of trauma down the line.
I mean, if we were to do it sort of how you just laid out, Brianna, I'm finding difficulty locating where we can switch the people that are currently doing all the protocols and seeing all the patients, because these are the people that have been stolen by the activism. And so we would have to literally replace almost everybody. I mean, you know this as well as I do, even the amount of just like credible doctors and surgeons that like adults see in this space is so limited, and there's so many issues, and the few that are like, okay, have this weird monopoly. And then it's just strange. You know, there's a difference between, like you said, Brad, you know, what about the children who know that they're trans and are going to end up being trans? There may be some, you know what I mean? And I don't deny that, because I've met people like that who are like, they knew at 14 and they're 35 years old and they're still like, I would never change a thing. I'm glad. However, that doesn't mean they knew the reality of being trans in general. They didn't know what it actually would mean to walk through the world, you know, being trans. And that's a huge factor for if you should transition or not. If you're weighing like, should I do this or should I not? You really need to have somewhat of an adult scope of what your life would actually be like. And on the flip side to all of this, I've also met, you know, trans people who transitioned underage, and not to be too harsh, but do not meet any criteria that people would call passable. You know, it's all a range. There's people that transition as kids and they still shoot up to 6 feet tall and they still don't look a certain way people might perceive a woman to look. So,
Yeah, so shout out to Blair, first of all, for staying consistent on being against children transitioning for 10 years. She's was right all along, and people are finally starting to realize that. Ugh, I have so much to say about Brianna's points. I'm trying to like condense my thoughts.
That's all right. You can say them all.
This idea, first of all, Brianna is always saying that we should stop transitioning trans men, female to male, but some male to females need it, and they need it young. And we need to, right, her whole like reasonable take is that we need to go back to when it was more difficult to get a diagnosis and it wasn't just being affirmed right away, which seems reasonable. But if you look at the criteria that these therapists are supposed to diagnose children with gender dysphoria based off of, I think it's like 6 out of 8. If they match 6 out of 8, it's, you know, likely that they're have gender dysphoria. I'm to a T. 6 out of 8 describe me as a child, and I am a man, not a trans woman.
Yeah, that's an interesting point actually, because I was reading your Substack today, and I actually have it here. So this is the criteria. So a strong desire on being another gender, a strong preference for clothing associated with the opposite gender, strong preference for toys and games or playmates of the opposite gender, strong preference for cross-gender roles during make-believe play. Like, this is just so ridiculous. How is this medical, you know, diagnostic criteria? Dislike of one's sexual anatomy, strong desire for secondary sex characteristics. So, you know, it's just confusing because some of these are societal and then some of them are anatomical. So straight away, to me, as a non-scientist, that seems very strange to kind of pair all those up in some sort of trans phenomenon. But it's just strange how many therapists or doctors will read that and go, oh yeah, okay, I feel comfortable saying that this person is in the wrong body because they like toys. Like, it's actually talking about toys.
It's so stupid. And yeah, it's completely societal. I mean, there's a million other cultures in the world where, like, of course, biologically, there's differences between men and women. But as far as like liking the color pink or liking the color blue, boys there's nothing biological about a boy that makes them naturally drawn to the color blue over pink. It's just societal pressure telling them that they should. So to say that something as stupid as that is evidence that they should be the opposite sex, it just doesn't even make any sense. It's sexist, it's regressive, it's homophobic. It will lead to a lot of gay kids and gender nonconforming kids, tomboys, being transitioned. I mean, Brianna, she has this, or he, whatever. I don't want to get in trouble with the gender criticals with the pronoun thing.
I'm a hypocrite because someone like Brianna, like, I purposely will say he because I just think he's disingenuous, disrespects women. You know, Blair, I can get on board with it because I respect Blair, and like, Blair is kind of real about this stuff. But anyway, yeah, go on.
I've seen so many gross tweets from Brianna recently. I'm sure you've probably seen the Hunter Schafer one where he said, if you want more Hunter Schafers, you should be okay with puberty blockers. Like, basically saying, if you want attractive trans women, let little gay boys transition as minors. He responded to this interview with Shapeshifter, the detransitioner, and said, how are you a detransitioner if you still have makeup and hair on? And it's like, we're living in 2025 in America. You think men can't have long hair and wear makeup if they want? And people telling them that they can't.
That directly, I think they probably find that like threatening, because that is someone staring at them in the face. I'm a man. I've had work done on my face. I have long hair. I have makeup. Shapeshifter even has breasts because he did it before he detransitioned. I don't think he's got them removed. And to them, that
Yeah.
is an entire like of their worldview, because it actually tells them you're still a man. You've just done these things to your body.
Right. And Brianna, I mean, I'm probably not wording these exactly correctly, but there's been a few tweets where Brianna said, like, there are some feminine boys who can't possibly fit into society the way they are. They would be better as women. They would make more sense as women. Like, it's basically saying that, not those exact words, but, and I'm like, well, I've been doing it. I've been functioning in society as a feminine man. I've recently broke up, but was in a relationship with a man for several years. I work a job. I have friends. My life is fine as a feminine man. So clearly that is not true. But it's just this really gross, evil, homophobic, like, belief that feminine boys can't exist as feminine boys, and that they have to transition, and that not only that they have to transition to make it in society, but they have to do it early, otherwise they won't be fuckable
Yeah.
enough, basically.
Yeah. And it just goes to show, did Brianna's transition work? Has it made Brianna happier? Because his whole rationale, there are these trans women, and actually, I don't think Brianna is HSTS. I think Brianna is AGP.
No.
An AGP that just one of these that obviously felt so validated being with a man to confirm that Brianna is a quote unquote woman, which he's not. And it's always the AGPs that I see having this fantasy of the trans child, because they represent this epitome of what they could never have had themselves. And they seem to always be far more obsessed with like passing, well, because they don't pass, whereas people like Blair, it's far easier. With the anatomical aspects, with the really kind of reductive, stereotypical things, like, Brianna talks about his jaw. So it's kind of like, who are you? Okay, first of all, your transition doesn't really seem to have made you 100% happy, because there's all of these things that you wish you could change. And then you're basically saying, let's solve that by transitioning kids, which you did not even do. So that's a completely different outcome.
Right.
You can't just say, oh, let's just do it to kids and then problem solved. It's like, well, you're choosing to sterilize them and, in some cases destroy their sexual organs and stuff. So it's like with the AGP men, it's just, Brianna just has this real kind of incel geeky vibe, which is so typical of them. And it's like just they kind of ruminate on the trans child and the feminine gay boy, because I don't know, I think it's this like fascination for them in the feminized male.
You 100% nailed it. Brianna, first of all, this isn't even like my theory, because Brianna has openly tweeted that he was bisexual until just recently, and then started saying he's gay. Like, there are tweets you can find of him being openly bisexual.
Now he's trying to be
whole life-
the moderate trans woman when he's realized the Democrats lost.
Yeah. And also, he tweeted something also recently about like the different types of trans people, like real transsexuals, not this type or this type or this type. And one of the types he listed that was not a real transsexual was, I think he said, like, the autistic anime nerd. And I'm like, that's you. You're describing yourself.
100%.
Like, you're describing yourself. There's pictures of him with anime action figures and My Little Ponies on his bookshelves behind him. He worked as a video game developer or something, which,
yeah,
when I first really
there's
started
so many
researching,
AGP like programmers and stuff, and in the military, like
they're all like computer nerds.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And the first book I read when I really started researching this stuff was Deborah So's
Yeah.
book. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last
yeah,
name
yeah,
right.
I love it.
And
The End of Gender, right?
she was, great book. And when she talked about the autogynephile and the HSTS type, she wrote that first of all, she said a lot of them are interested in computer stuff. They transitioned later in life, not they didn't show any feminine qualities when they were little. Brianna checks every box. And she also said that they oftentimes try to rewrite their history because they realize that the easiest way to get surgeries and get approved for hormones and stuff is to pretend to be the HSTS
Oh,
type.
100%.
And
Yeah.
at the time when I read that, I was like, really? I haven't really seen that. But the more I looked into it, I see it all the time. And Brianna fits that description
Yeah.
exactly.
And I think, yeah, I just find Brianna so disingenuous because once he saw the Democrats were plummeting and going to lose, and he obviously has been in the public eye, not for just being trans, but because of his activism for the Democrats and a bunch of other stuff I can't remember. But, you know, he's been interviewed about being a Democrat on quite large mainstream podcasts. So it was all too convenient for him to then suddenly go, oh my God, all of these trans activists are crazy and it's their fault. People hate us. And now I'm going to be this moderate ground and I'm going to be a Blair White, like, hey, you know, a gay, feminine trans man who like, or trans, whatever, you guys know what I'm talking about. Feminine man
Right.
who, you know, just struggled so much and, you know, basically gay. You know, I'm moderate on the sports issue. You know, I want to protect women. And it's just, you know, with Blair, like you said, Blair has been consistent since day one. And Blair was pointing things out that nobody else was even seeing, let alone disagreeing with. So I just find it so
And
gross, all of it.
I know. And Blair, Buck Angel, is it Marcus Dibb, the offensive?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't even know
yeah.
if I can say the
The
word without
FTM.
getting demonetized. Um, they've been saying all this stuff, like the non-binary stuff has to stop, the pronoun stuff has to stop, the policing of speech has to stop, men and women's sports in prisons has to stop. They've been saying all this stuff and getting completely excommunicated from their supposed community for it, labeled as like crazy, bigoted, pick me, far right Nazis. Was Brianna ever chiming in to defend them ever?
No.
Until all of a sudden she's like, or he's like, this is my platform. This is what I think needs to happen. And he'll list everything. And it's just everything that Blair has been saying for 10
Yeah.
years. And it's like, wow, now all of a sudden you're, now that you realize the tide has turned and people are sick of this shit, now you want to
I think he's
pretend to be
loving it too. I
moderate.
mean, for some reason, a lot of these autogynephiles love attention. Like if you look at that India Willoughby one, if you know who I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And, you know, Piers Morgan has
Yeah.
had Brianna on his show now twice, which is obviously a huge, huge platform. So he's absolutely loving this. And it annoys me because a lot of the gender critical people can see what's going on and they're like, don't believe this shit. Actually, that brings me on nicely to this true trans argument because, you know, Brad will say people who actually have gender dysphoria, quote unquote, and actually need to transition, quote unquote, as the true trans person, Blair being one of them in his mind. And so would Buck Angel and probably Marcus Dibb, like you mentioned. So what are your thoughts on that? Plus also, what are your thoughts on Blair? Because, you know, anyone in the comments that still believes in true trans, like look at our conversation now. If you pair had facial feminization surgery, more makeup, more work done, breasts, I mean, what is the difference between you and Blair is the question. Like, do you, I know I've asked you a lot of questions there. So let's start on that true trans point.
Yeah. So when people say, do you believe trans people exist? I'm always like, well, it depends what you're asking. There are people who do that. They medically change their body to look more like the opposite sex and change their name and choose to live a certain way.
Yeah.
Those people exist. And as long as they're not spreading gender ideology or going into women's spaces, I don't care. Like, I think they should consider the possibility that they have trauma or internalized homophobia, or I think they should really research things before they choose to transition. But like if I meet a trans person in everyday life, I'm not like some angry bigot who's gonna make an effort to call them the wrong pronoun or whatever. So, like, I have no issue with trans people. They exist in the sense that they're not imaginary. Nobody is born in the wrong body, though.
Yeah.
Nobody. It's a completely fictional concept. It can't be proven. It will never be proven. So if you're saying, like, do you believe trans people exist in the sense of that there are people who are born trans? Absolutely not. There are people like Blair who, she did that, like, therapy video with that therapist where she talked about her trauma and how she thinks now not wanting to be in her body is probably a big part of why she transitioned, like almost wanting to escape who she was, the body that abuse happened to. There's a trans, you should actually interview this person, Xander Keg. I don't know if you've heard of
I
him.
haven't actually.
He's been on Buck Angel's channel, and he has a really great book about basically nonconformity in general. He's a very not involved in the ideological craziness trans person. He'll openly say, the reason why I transitioned is because I was a lesbian in the 80s and I experienced so much homophobia, bottles being thrown at me, that I made the decision to transition. I did not always know I was trans. It wasn't this thing I was born as. It was a decision I made. And I appreciate the honesty. I think it's sad that you're kind of admitting to living a lie, basically.
Mhm.
But anyways, sorry, I'm kind of getting off track, but there is no difference between me and Blair or a butch lesbian and Xander, the trans man I just described. There is no difference other than a decision. And that decision might be because of sexual trauma, like wanting to attract a certain type of partner, being turned up. Like, there's all types of reasons why the decision is made, but it is a decision.
Yeah.
Nobody is born trans.
Yeah, because I mean, I've always loved Blair, trans aside, because I think Blair is hilarious and really witty and
Yeah.
also talks about other political issues. And I've learned a lot about that side of the debate and stuff like that. So I like that Blair is more than just trans, just as a person.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of people like watching Blair, to be honest. But I am kind of, and I do think it's really, I really respect the fact that Blair obviously did what she did and then has continued on this path of like self-discovery and unpacking things. She hasn't just like stopped, at the beginning of transition and then, kept everything in the closet. But I kind of wonder now, after her being able to get to grips with all of this stuff and admit it, and so much of what she talks about is like being called a faggot, and her homophobic bullying was horrendous.
Yeah.
So it makes so much sense why the thought of being a gay man was just not viable. So, and even when someone asks her like, "Are you a man?" she'll be like, "Yeah,"
Yeah.
because you can't change sex. So I do wonder, like, will there ever be a point where she starts to see herself just as a type of gay man?
Well, that's the thing. It's kind of scary transitioning because depending on how much work you have done, detransitioning becomes much more difficult. I mean, Blair has had a lot of work done, and I'm a fan of Blair too. I actually think she looks really great. She has a boyfriend, a partner. Her life is obviously going well.
Yeah.
But it is kind of like, okay, so do I completely detransition? And I mean, how does that even work with the amount of facial work she's had done? It could possibly end the relationship she's in. Or do I kind of keep essentially living a lie, even though I have come to the realization that it is a lie? It's just,
Yeah,
it's kind of this tricky situation.
I kind of maybe see where she's at now is that she just likes the aesthetic. And if people naturally call her she, then, so be it, which obviously is going to be the case for her. I think what concerns me more for her would be just how bad taking estrogen is for a man. I mean, it really messes up your sex drive. And that, she talks all the time about having no sex drive and because of the estrogen. So that's not a great experience for any human to like not be in touch with their sexuality. And then also just the risks for cancer. And I mean, I think, I've talked to therapists who treat trans people, quote unquote, and gender dysphoric people and detransitioners. they say on average, like the men who are taking estrogen or, you know, had vaginoplasties and have no testosterone struggle so much more than the women on testosterone, because for a male body to not have testosterone causes us so many issues like depression, anxiety, poor sleep, brain fog, lack of energy, like, you know, so bone problems, so many things. So she seems to be doing really well right now in terms of how successful she is. And I never get any sense that she's like brain foggy or anything like that. But I think that would be the main concern for me, not just for her specifically, but for other men that come to this realization and connect the dots. It's like, well, you know, fair enough if you want to, you've obviously had the work done, you have the breasts, maybe you like them, that's fine, keep them. But the question of staying on hormones and testosterone blockers, I just think that's kind of a concern.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, going back to Brianna, a huge reason why I think it's so gross and evil to ever promote the idea that feminine boys should go on this stuff. There's so much evidence that it is horrible for you, that it leads to a higher rate of testicular cancer. And even just the aesthetic part, like Blair got lucky with her height because that's usually a dead giveaway. She's pretty short. She was able to afford a lot of surgery.
How tall are you?
It's 5'9".
Okay.
So like her life, she's a very, very rare
I agree.
example. Most men will never, ever, ever be able to pass like her. And just like, so it's obviously the medical issues is the biggest concern. We're encouraging people to do things that could physically harm them and sterilize them. But then also this whole conversation about passability, we're seeing so many men and even teenage boys who will never, ever, ever pass, not with any amount of surgery. And there's girls in their comments saying, you look amazing, you're gorgeous, like basically encouraging them. They'll post saying, I have my surgery scheduled for this date, and it's all this love and support in the comments. And so that's the other thing about Blair is like people, I think, see her and think that that's attainable. And it is absolutely
and
not for most
they see all the success she has. And I wonder if that's kind of why her transition became such a success, because she first made a YouTube video just a few months in. So, she hadn't experienced the benefits necessarily. But then that kind of catapulted her into this like fame, basically. So you can see why maybe that would be a big factor in the success story of all of it. But for people that are not like that, don't have a good support system, don't have great family, don't have a great job, are already struggling mentally, like it just seems like another layer of crap to add on top of that, to be like, okay, your life is already so difficult, let's take away all your testosterone and give you a bunch of like traumatic surgeries. And that is the side of transition you don't see, because it's not shared really publicly.
Yes, and you're leading them down a path where they will obsessively be thinking about their appearance, always wondering if they're getting clocked, if they're passing, if people are misgendering them, obsessively thinking about surgery, being fetishized, most likely not ever having a real romantic partner. It's just, there's very, very few people, specifically the male to female. Female to male have more luck because the beard does a lot of the work for them. There's very few male to female where you will just pass in society and have this great life and everything will be amazing and you'll finally be your true self. It's just going to add a million more issues onto the issues you already have.